positioning offset. So inside demo, I'm going to create a box, and I'm just going to follow BEM inside here. BEM is double underscores. I have a couple videos about BEM. And inside here, I'm just going to put an X inside here. Inside my code, we're going to just give this an outline, 1 pixels, solid red, and then we're going to have demo underscore box. And we're going to give this a background color of this. We're going to give it a color of white. So we'll see this guy. And I'm going to give it a width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels. And I'm just going to say cool. We'll do the hack for aligning. We'll just say highlight 100%. So there's that X in the middle. All right, so from here, I can do a bunch of different things with this box. If I want to center it in the middle, let's create a helper class. So the U in front of it stands for utility, and we're going to say center item and say margin left auto and margin right auto. I'm going to add this helper class on here. So now it'll be centered in the middle. So to center something in the middle, you have to have a width associated with it, and you can do this. Now there's other ways of centering inside here. If this was a flex, this parent was a flex, I could do justify item center and it would go in the middle. But this is kind of a more traditional way of doing it, and it works really, really well. But that is not the purpose of this demo. The purpose of this demo is I'm going to put demo, and I'm going to add a margin top. I'm going to say 100 pixels and a margin bottom of 100 pixels. So it's going to move from the top here in a second. Now this box, if I were to say I want it to be on the top right. So let's remove this class for right now and say I want this box to be on the right side. There's a bunch of ways that I could do this. I could say float right and move it over there. But you can see that this line is broken, so then I have to do that clear float fix on this. So I can say clear after content clear both display inline table, and let's give it a width of 100% just to be safe. And now that box is back, so it's on the right side. The other way, probably a more simplified way, is to then say, instead of float, I could change this to a display inline block and say text align right, and now it's going to be on the right side. So that's another way of doing this. Another way is to say display flex on this parent and say align items flex end. Line item flex end, flex start, flex end. Why is this happening to me today? I feel like I've forgotten how to use flex. I don't know why. Flex end, align items. All right, so if I make this a flex column, then you can do that because it's looking at the different sides of it. So that's another way of doing it. The other way of doing this is to use positioning. And that's really why I was showing this. So there's millions of ways of doing this. And with development, there's never a right or wrong way. There's about 10,000 ways of doing them and maybe 1 or 2 preferred way. But it's always around the limitations that you have in your code and how you have it set up. So the other way of doing this is using the CSS property of position. And with that, we're going to look at position absolute, relative, and fixed. So if I were to make this guy and say position absolute, and I said right, it goes off the side of the screen. And then do you remember how I showed you about the clear float here? That cannot apply to this. So position relative absolute goes outside the bounds of the parent unless it's relative to it. So an absolute is actually looking not to its parent, but the closest relative DOM element for it. So if I were to say, forget the right, and I said, well, forget the right, and I just made this top, it's going to go outside the bounds of this. Now, if I put something inside demo and I just put a paragraph and I said lorem ipsum like 40, this has a height. And the height of this is based off of the height of this paragraph tag. And you'll notice that this was 100 pixels and this is a random size based off of that. So that's because there's no absolute, there's no calculation for absolute position because it's going outside the bounds here. Interesting thing here is let's remove this absolute for right now, and let's add back in use center. Is that what I call it? Or use center item. So now it's just centered in the page. If I put absolute, it goes over there because it's losing this margin left and right. So if I wanted to center this in the page using absolute, I could do left 50%. But if you were really paying close attention, this is not actually 50% of the screen. So what this is 50% of the farthest side of this. So then to center this, I have to say margin left, negative, half the width of this, which is 50%. And now this is centered in the page. Did that move? I don't know if that moved or not, but that should have done that. So if I look at this, this is now centered in the middle of this. Oh, this is why I put this stupid thing in here. There we go. So that's centered. This is not centered in the page because this is actually 25 pixels or 50 pixels off because this is 100 width. So that's one way of centering it. If I wanted to center it with absolute, another thing I could do is transform and say translate x negative 50%. And then this allows for a little bit more flexibility. So if I made this a width of like 300 pixels, it would stay there. Where if I did the margin left on this, I would have to update this every single time to align with it. So if this goes back to 100, it's going to be off there. But if I go back to the transform, translate x, negative 50%, it's always going to be 50% of the middle of this. So that's a way of centering it. But back to what I was saying is I can do left on here, and it will go up there. If I do right, it's going to go there. If I do top, it goes outside this bound. If I do bottom, it's going to be on the bottom of this line. So why is it jumping around like this? And if I did something like this, bottom, right, bottom, it's going to be down here. If I did top right, it's going to be here. But if I remove this top, it's going to be here. And if I do left, it's going to be here. But if I did top left, it goes outside. So this is how positioning works in, I don't know why that didn't go up. This is how positioning works in absolute. So why is it going in and out of these things? Let's give demo a fixed height too. Let's just give it a height of, let's just say it has a min height of 200 pixels, which is twice the size of this box here. So again, this guy is going out of it. Let's give us a different variation here so we can see more space. All right. If I want this guy to be in the top right-hand corner of this X, you would think that I would say top right, but it's going outside here. The reason is absolute position is looking at the closest relative parent. In the case of that, that is a body tag by default. So if I wanted it to be in this top of this, what I have to say is demo has position relative. I cannot type today. So now it's there. Now it's saying demo box is relative to its parent demo. So now if I go left, it's up here. If I go bottom, it's going to be down there. If I go right, it's going to go here. Fantastic. And if I wanted to go center, well, there isn't a really easy way of doing that in position absolute, but as I said, this is probably the best way of doing it, which is not really the best way. That's one of the CSS like annoying things, but it makes sense why it happens, and we don't really have too much time to go into it. So the other thing is, I don't really need to put top here. Let's go top left. And this. So if I turn these guys off, it remains there. And if I go top right, it's going to go over here. I don't need this top here because it's relative to it. However, if I wanted this to go to the bottom, I would need it. But if I said bottom left, I don't need the left. I just need this. Now, if I had some other content here, like hi, and I did this, actually, let's add something in here. Demo box. Let's call this demo line. Let's add an emoji. All right, so we have that. I'm going to call this line. So we have demo line. Demo line's not really doing anything, it's just kind of positioned there. Noticing if I get rid of absolute, it's going to be stacking up next to each other. If I did relative and switch this to relative, so instead of it being absolute, I did relative, and I said right, it's not going to move over here. Relative is just a way of positioning it to its spot and where it is in the container, and I could do something like 100 pixels and move it over. I don't know why that just happened. If I went like this, oh, it will move the other way. If I went top, it moves it 100 pixels that way. If I went negative, it would go 100 pixels the other way. This is different than margin top. So if I said margin top negative 100 pixels, it calculates the original height of it down here and offsets it. So let's go back and remove this min height 100%. So this margin top removes it, but if I had position top, it will remain 200 here. So that's the difference between using margin top and relative top, and the same thing with the bottom and margin bottom. So when I do top, it keeps the parent here, and it kind of like imagines that this is still here, but it's just like gutted up and moved up. Same thing happens if I do bottom. And then if I go min height here, doesn't really change anything. But if I change to margin bottom, I actually would calculate the same because that height's the same. All right, so relative though, I can now go back and use this guy, and it will be centered. So this is kind of a plus of using the relative. Now, if I wanted this box to be outside this bound, like up here, there isn't a good way of doing this once I have the position relative. So absolutes and relatives do come in handy if I wanted my design to break outside of its current bound because I am limited by the DOM, and I wanted this to be up at the top of the page as opposed to inside this container, I can make it seem like this guy exists in a different zone in a different area, even though the DOM of this exists inside here. So this box looks like, if you were to imagine visually what this looks like versus what the code looks like, this guy is up here and this guy's down here. So that's nice. And there's a lot of use cases. I use absolute not that much, and the relative and absolute comes in play here and there. Primarily in navigations is where you'll see them, like logos and moving things around. I think CSS Grid is going to be kind of the replacement for some of these, and Flex has kind of already become that way too. But another thing, let's look back here. So we have this guy centered in the middle of the page. We have relative. Remember how earlier in the last session we were talking about how overflow is another way to clear floats? If I were to do something like this and make this box be position, relative, top, negative 100 pixels, you see how it's going outside here? If I said overflow hidden, it's going to cut that off. So now I don't see it. This becomes kind of cool and exciting and like a good pattern. If you see this red pattern here, if I wanted to make this red and I wanted to do something like this, transform, translate, negative 50%. And rotate, negative 45 degrees. Jesus. So now I have this like nice little cutaway. So it kind of gives you this like visual effect that there is an arrow here, but in reality it's just a square that's rotated 45 degrees. And then I can make this even look better if I wanted to make, say, hey, make the body background color red. So, oh. And then I would have to do this. Did not think about this too. That was an example on the fly. So now it looks like this guy's like kind of cut away. Really shitty design, but I've seen worse on the web. All right. Any questions about positioning so far? Because that's really important.
I'm following along. I'm following along. Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Cool, cool, cool. All right, so next we're going to look at fixed. So let's do something like this. Let's just build out a quick little navigation. And then we'll have UL. Let's call this also. Oops. Menu. So I'm following BEM here. That's my preferred methodology of organization. And then we'll add class navlink here. Of course, I would want to add all my attributes, like my title tags. Hover me. And I would add that in all of those, but I'm not going to go through the effort of doing that. But that hover me is on this guy. What am I missing here? Yeah, hover me, and that one guy doesn't have it. So to get started here, I'm also going to add another little helper here, and I'm just going to call it an Unlist. We've kind of done that before. A helper class. You know what? I'm going to follow my conventions just because it's really bothering me that I'm not. Sorry. All right, so we're going to create a basic nav here. And inside nav, we're going to follow BEM. So what BEM is, it's saying that this list is part of nav, and they're kind of connected to each other. It makes really a lot of sense when you're doing like positioning in relative and absolute to make sure that your codes can organized and I guess in a way that you know how the CSS is related to your DOM and your DOM is related to CSS without looking at the two of them together. So with that, you don't have to have both HTML and CSS next to each other to understand how the two operate with each other. So it's just a way of coupling your code together. So what this is saying is nav list is always inside of nav. So cnav is the block and cnav double underscore list is the element. Double dash is our modifier, so this is a modifier. And I have a YouTube video all about BEM. All right, and then inside here, I'm going to go and make C menu, and then make C menu item. I got blood drawn this morning, and I feel like it's made me off all day. I think it was because I drank it afterwards. No comment.
Don't worry, I always suspected as much. Don't worry, I always suspected as much.
And then we're going to create this Unlist class here. And Unlist, I'm going to look at this and do a reset on it. So Unlist is looking at this unordered list. What I want to make it do, what I want to do is override all the default CSS properties that are on side of it. So there's a padding left that's defined as 40 pixels, a margin top and margin bottom of 1 rem, and with it as a list style, as well as some other pieces on it that are not a display block. How I know this is if I go to this line and I go to unordered list, I can see this by the user agent, which is the CSS properties that are defined to an element by default. So if I look at this, like ListStyle is a disk. These are also shared between menu and directory. So if I wanted to change this to menu, it would have the same thing, same effect to it. But if I make this be an OL, you'll see that this changes to from a disk to a decimal, which is kind of cool. And that's the only one that shares that. But we're going to go back to unordered list, and I'm going to override the CSS properties that I don't want of this and use that as a reset. So a reset versus a normalized. Normalized looks at across CSS selectors that are stabilizing HTML elements across all browsers for consistency. And a reset is something that you have defined as rules, so you have consistency in your style guide and the work that you're doing. So I'm going to say padding left is 0. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say margin top is 0 and margin bottom is 0. So I'm only overriding the properties that are ones that are giving me are problematic. I'm going to say list style is none. And that's basically it. And this has a display block. I don't really have to mess with that. If I wanted to, I could add styles on the children. But if I were to do something like this, as we talked previously, this would have high specificity. So if I said, even though these guys have a list style of list item, they're not really displaying as that. They're coming across more like block. But if I were to do something like this, display block, this would be problematic because this has pretty high specificity. So if I wanted to do something like, oh, let's make all these list items or menu items as display inline, like the example we gave last week, it's not going to happen. The reason why that's not going to happen is because this has higher specificity and this guy is being overwritten. I don't know why that didn't refresh. So do you see this slash through it? Why it's getting slashed through is this guy has higher specificity. And then if I were to say I want all list items to be block or inline block, or let's just keep it as block. Now, this guy is winning because it has higher specificity because it's a class, and classes go over type selectors. Now the issue with this is if I have an unordered list out here and I just want to put some content here, notice that my bullets are gone and these are all merging together. So that's a shitty thing to happen, so I'm going to get rid of it. And now I have a traditional unordered list here, and I have these. So that's just something that you need to be really paying attention to as you're building out CSS, is making sure that you're not overriding something and adding too much specificity on your code. All right, so looking at this. This is a good reset. And I don't want to add any display types because I may want to make it something else. So we have CNAV and we have all this stuff. So CNAV, I'm going to leave it as is for right now. And if I wanted to do something more specific, which I will show you later, we're going to come back to it. For right now, we're going to focus on the menu. We're going to give this a nice little look. So I'm going to just give it a text transform, uppercase. I'm also going to give it text decoration, none. I'm going to switch my body from the beginning. And again, like I would organize my CSS to actually be written in this order. So CSS should be written from top to bottom. So kind of at the very top of this, you would have your tools generic, but it kind of goes from elements. So these are like generic, far-reaching, and then you get into the elements. So these are your type selectors. These are objects. So your structural things. These are components. Very specific items. Utilities are helpers that extend the components as well as the objects. Things like alignment, styles, colors. Theme is if you want to have specific themes attached to it to change the look, feel of it. The underscore is a hack. JS is for JavaScript. So that's like the C here stands for component. So at the beginning of this, I would probably put, oh, I already made this. I used this twice. I'm actually going to use this here. So I have consistency from last week to this one. I want to put my helper classes at the end and components here. So let's move these up and actually organize this in the right CSS way. And the reason is this helps you just keep things really aligned and organized. So, you know, as we talked about, you know, the order of CSS. So like, for example, if I have this guy, let's just give it a color of red. And then say I have C-link up here that has a color of lime. It's going to remain red. This is like a really old lesson that we talked about. But if I put this afterwards, it's going to be green. So the order of CSS does matter when it comes to overriding. But then what's more important is specificity. So let's make another one that's called blue. So this is not blue. It's actually being overwritten by red and then lime. Let's make this a better color that we can read. Purple. So blue is not being seen, but I could make it be seen by adding higher specificity. So now it's going to be blue. Oh, blue. And that's because it has higher specificity. It doesn't matter the order of it. If I wanted this to still be purple, but it's out of this, I could say something like li this and then override that. So it has higher specificity. If I make this red, it's going to be red. Now, you want to avoid specificity as much as possible. That's why BEM rules. All right, so not the coolest style here, but I'm going to say font family and inherit my base font on this. I'm going to say sans serif so I don't get into that argument. Great. Fantastic. What a beautiful menu. And I'm going to give it a font weight of bold, because bold is cool. Jesus Lordy. All right, so that's a nav link. Not doing much here. What I'm also going to do is, I like to also make some utility, so like display type utilities. So I may do something like display block. As well as like inline block. Even though this is a long title, it is very flexible and helpful. Flex. When I write CSS, my goal is to write CSS once and then reuse it when needed. I'm not going to do that one. That's kind of a silly one. So then if I wanted to make these guys be, have some padding on it, I could. I could also make use space, have padding. Not going to really for this, but these are kind of nice to have if you need them. Let's just outline this so you can see where these are. I'm going to outline them with the yellow. So you can see these. Let's do orange. So they're outlined in orange. If I add padding around it and say on the top I want 5 pixels and I want 10 on the sides. Bless me. And I'm going to give it a line height of 1. Cool. It's not really doing much. But now these are all styled, and we have these. Actually, I'm going to give these a border. So we'll make that be part of the design. And I'm going to get rid of this guy. So it inherits the red color. All right, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a hover, which is a pseudo class. If I'm doing a hover, I should also do a focus for accessibility reasons. And I'm going to say background color is red and color is white. So now we're going to have kind of a reverse here. Okay, so I hover this and we have this. So we have these guys and we have this. It's not really doing much. And if I do this, we'll go back to over there. I can't believe no one's called me out on that yet. And yeah, so here we have this. All right, so what I want this to happen, and right now these are all kind of stacked up on each other because they're just lists, and we have this padding. These don't have a display type or anything inside of them. I'm going to give it a display inline block just to give it something. So that fixes that spacing. Because spacing and margin, those were anchors, those were just inline, so that's why they were kind of merging on top of each other. Now I want these to be next to each other, similar to like what we did last week. And for C menu, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a display flex. I want to expand the width of this entire screen, so I'm going to say justify. Oops. Justify content. Center. So now they're in the middle. And what I want to do is I want to space them in between. So I'm going to say something like this. Now there's spaces in between. And why this is nice is saying one menu item. So where the space is actually being calculated is in between this, because it's like this menu item to the next menu item, put a space in between it. So the selector is actually in between it. To kind of show you this bigger, it's not happening on the first one. So it's just happening in between. If this was actually on all menu items, you would see that this gets bumped over. Make it be more dramatic. You can see that this is getting bumped over. But if I do this, it's only happening in between them, which is nice. Now, there's a couple of things that you can also do is we can say forget this. And if I want this also to be right aligned, I can say first item, margin left, auto. It's going to push it all the way to the other side. Oh my God, first child. So you can see that pushes that over there. If I wanted them all to move, I would do the left, which is really nice. If I wanted this first one to be on this left side, say this first one said home, and this had like about us, and this said shop or contact us, I could say, all right, second child or nth child 2, which is the second one, give it a margin left and a margin right. So now it's in the middle, and those ones are separated on the side. But I may just want it to be like this. And then I may want to say margin right 10 pixels to space it out. Nice. And then this will flex with the screen here. So a bunch of different things that you could do in different patterns of building out a menu. A lot of different tactics here. And as I said earlier, we could do the position absolute and move these all in different ways. And if I really wanted to get tricky, what I could say is this. Push this guy, contact us, and I could say last child, position absolute, and say right 0, top 0, and it's going to be up here, which is going to get us into the ability for this to scroll. So let's add some fake data here. Let's just call this div. Let's add a h1 here. Let's go. I don't know why that keeps happening. And then let's add in a 1,4000. Okay. Oops. Very cool. So this is a huge block of text here. I'm also going to put this in something that I'm going to call O container, which is going to center it in the page. Actually going to put this all in here, so I'll do a traditional example of a pattern that I follow. So we have menu, we have O container, and then we're going to have O container wrap. And this is where it's going to be like, oh, that moved really quick. And this is going to be probably one of the most common interface patterns that you could build very quickly. I don't know, why is that so hideous? Come on, CodePen. You ass. I don't know. Anyways, that is an ugly block of code here, and I'm getting too obsessed by it. There we go. So I'm going to go back up to my objects, and I'm going to add in O object. I'm going to get rid of the span here because it's annoying me. I'm going to say O container. Add a paragraph here. Period, I mean. I'm not going to have a width on it right now, and I'm going to say wrap. And I'm going to say max width of 1,000 pixels. And I'm going to say margin left auto. And I'm going to say margin right auto. And it's centered. So now we have this. Now we're going to go back to C menu. So this is centered in the page. And I'm also going to do one thing. So this is going to be a quick little lesson on responsive because it's going to be relevant to this. To do responsive, we use what's called media queries. So right now, if I make this smaller, you can see that it kind of wraps here, but it's based off the gutter here, and that's not what I want it to do. So I'm going to do one of my favorite patterns, which is using this. And I'm going to say at media screen, which is the feature, and then I'm going to say my type is min width of 100 pixels, 1,000 pixels. I'm going to curly bracket it and put this guy inside here. And then I'm going to do the same here. Oops. for this guy. Wrap it in here and say max width. And to give this some like nice spacing here, so I want to keep my gutters consistent, I'm going to add in margin right, and once it gets to 1,000, so I'm going to do 80, and then 80 here, and say margin left, and instead of it being auto, they're going to be 40 pixels and 40 pixels. So now we have this nice fluid. As I get smaller, I keep my gutters, so my text doesn't go from one side to another. Center, center, centered, and then 80 pixel gutters. Let's get rid of this margin on here because it's obnoxious. All right. That's cool. Now, this is an obnoxious width on here, so I'm going to add the same container wrap on my navigation. And add it here. So now this guy's centered here, but you can remember that contact us is floating up there. The reason why it's floating up there is because nav is not a relative position. If I want contact us not to be there, maybe I always want it in the top right hand corner, I can do that. But before I do that, what I'm going to show you is, do you see how this is scrolling and this menu moves? I can change this to be fixed. And now this will scroll, but that will remain up there. Ooh, wow. Let's do one more thing. Remember how we had nav up here? Let's add a background color of red. Ooh, color, white. And then let's change these to inherit. Ooh, nice. And then let's also add one more thing here. Padding, 10 pixels. Ooh. Let's actually make it be 20 pixels. Oh, and then let's do this. Margin, negative 10 pixels. Oops, that's not going to work. I need to have one more. Let's do this. I got too excited about that one. Let's do negative 10 pixels. And then let's do Jesus. Cool. Let's do 10 and then 20 pixels. So let's give it all 20 pixels. Nice. So then that way they're kind of stacked all nicely together if they have to wrap. There's many different ways of doing this. All right, so now this isn't doing much because I removed that hover too. Sorry about that, but this guy is still remaining fixed up there, but it kind of goes away, which is an interesting effect where those ones roll up. Instead of doing that, what we can also do is, I'm trying to think, that was probably a bad example to do the inherited. Let's just make it black for sake of time. There we go. So that's kind of a weird effect, but that happens. Instead of it being over there, I want it to be here. And I want to give these also a background color inside here of white. So let's just do that on the last one. So we're going to take this guy and say on the last nav link, it's pretty high specificity here, but that's intentional. So this guy's white and the other ones aren't, and then we'll also have a different hover for it. And we'll say hover as well as active or focus. Let's do color, red. Right. And now as we scroll, it still does that, but let's keep menu and these guys, the nav, position, relative, and now we're going to see this guy kind of bump over here into the middle and stay with inside my gutters. Yes, it should. Oh. Let's see menu add-on. Let's go back absolute. Fix. Oh, my bad. I put it on the wrong one. Come on. Come on. Why is that happening? Oh, it needs to be on this one. See menu. Oh, didn't I just add that? I meant to add it here. I keep putting that in the wrong spot. And then I'm thinking I'm doing it wrong. What in the world? This is the exact demo I did earlier. Okay, there we go. So that guy's there, and now it's aligned to everything inside here. If I wanted this all to be actually fixed position, so it's all rolling, the option that I also have is to say, all right, we have CNav, CMenu, CNav list. Let's make it be position fixed. God, I keep screwing up my selectors. CNav list. It's this guy. This has higher specificity, that's why I was doing it. And position fixed doesn't have, by default, a width on it, so I would have to do like right, and then as well as like 0 to fulfill it. And we also lost the height here, which is a pain in the ass to do. Let me think of another quick way of doing this for this demo. But
Hey, y'all.
yeah.
Really quickly, I'm going to have to run out.
Yeah.
Hey, y'all. Really
All right,
quickly,
so basically
I'm
the last thing I was going to
run
show
out.
really quick was how to do a fix on this. But this is kind of a basic pattern for creating a web page. There's two different ways of keeping this fix at the page and having this scroll and having this up at top. The only thing about it is if I make this be fixed up here, CNav, and I say like this, position fixed, and I do width 100%, you'll notice that it will go on top of this guy, and I don't want it to do that. So what I have to do is calculate the height of this and offset the bottom of it. So typically I would do like CNav in the next div after, offset the height of this guy. So this is one way of doing it, but there's many different ways of doing this. Let's just say padding top 100 pixels or 80 pixels, whatever that height is. And now we have that. So that's a way of making a menu. Sorry for going over. Sorry for being a little bit all over the place today, but I hope that this was helpful in positioning relative, absolute, as well as fixed, and kind of a review of grids.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.